Welcome, everyone, to Ladder Daily Digest. Ladder Daily Digest tries to promote creators. If you've created a book or a podcast or even a documentary. And today we have Kristy Johnson on, who has a documentary about her life that has occurred. And we're going to chat about her life and about her experiences with creating that documentary. And so, Kristy, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. It's great to be here. Thank you.
That's right. Give us a little bit about your upbringing. What formative events happened in your life when you were growing up?
Yeah, well, I was born, as a Mormon, blessed, born. My parents were married in the temple, so you're automatically born in the covenant. And so I was mostly raised, in Provo, Utah. But our family history, we were talking earlier about our history or the church history, and our family line on my dad's side goes all the way back to Joseph Smith and the original ward directory. So that
Wow.
is something that the family was very proud of. Thomas Smith Johnson was his name. And
Right.
so he, you know, helped move people from Missouri, did all those
Right.
crossings and was like one of the right hand men for Brigham Young. And, you know, um,
We're going to have to check on Family Search to see how closely related we are, because I am fourth cousin, 4 times removed to Joseph Smith. So
wow.
somewhere,
Yeah,
somewhere
isn't that
cousins.
interesting? It's like we all
Yeah.
cross some way. It's just,
Yeah.
but our family was so proud, and they still are. A lot of them are, not me so much, but yeah. So we're deeply rooted, and especially to the leadership of the church, and so I was raised on that pioneer stock stories, and my dad was hired on as in the church education system. So a lot of people didn't realize he was CES, church education system, and educated teaching seminary institute. He taught at Brigham Young University for a
Mhm.
while. And so I was mostly raised as a kid in Provo and Ogden, Utah.
Oh,
And so, loved primary, was very much involved in the youth programs. I loved it. It was a refuge for me to go to those programs. And I'll always be grateful for that base, and grounding, because I learned a lot of really good morals. And
right.
um,
Were you
yeah,
proud to see
besides,
the Y on the mountain as you would drive
yes,
around
I actually
the
hiked
valley?
the Y with
There you go.
my father and some of my siblings. And we lived there when the Provo Temple was being built. And
Mm.
so we actually got to go on the little tour before it's dedicated. And I remember the carpets, it just was so massive, and just being, in such awe of it. And
It almost meant the church was true to see this
yes.
magnificent structure.
And I truly believed that, though, too.
Mhm.
When I was
Mhm.
being raised, and, I served a mission. I actually, had all the callings as a young woman, like the Beehive secretary or Laurel, president, and all those youth things. And then I also served as a young adult in leadership, over the stake and young adults. I was a sorority president. The church had a sorority.
And
And
by then, were you living in Southern California?
yeah, we did move my dad was transferred because he was pretty naughty, bad guy. Um, After my mother had turned him in to the university. And by the way, Dallin Oaks was the president of the university there at the time my father
In the
taught
mid
there.
70s?
Yeah, and so when when it was reported what he was doing there on campus and stuff, they transferred my father out to Southern California and made
Just like
him,
the priests in the Catholic
yeah,
Church.
they made him, like, they demoted him, and no offense to institute teachers, but they, took him from this university teacher educator where he shared an office with, Joseph McConkie, Bruce R. McConkie's son. And I don't mean to be like braggy, but it's important to know,
His
you know,
status.
his status. Somehow that's so important to a lot of people. Um, but anyway, he was transferred out to Southern California to teach an institute program, which is across the street from, like, community colleges and things like that. So yeah, so we were in Glendora, California, out of Los Angeles County, and then he was finally transferred to Orange County. And that's where I lived from 8th grade on. And like I said, all the callings, just very devoted to the church. And I served a mission as well. And
When
served
you
part of
went,
it.
did they have the lower age, the lower I
No,
don't mean age, I mean the men only had to do 18 months?
I believe that changed when my brother Kevin was on his mission. So no, we had, us girls had to wait till we were 21 because they
Right.
didn't want us at the same age group as the young men. And so that was interesting. But yeah, and ours was always 18 months. Girls never served 2 years. But the guys were given a choice to serve 18 or 2 years. And then they switched it back. I don't know. And then I think you
Right.
can go now when you're 18. Very interesting. You
Yeah.
know, they look different, they act
Yeah.
different. We
19
weren't allowed to wear
for
pants.
women and 18 for young men.
Yeah. So lots changed. I just remember, going out there with high hopes, and I had a very different, mission.
And where'd you
And
go?
I was first originally called to Chicago,
Oh,
and I loved it. And then about 6 months in, there was some problems there on the mission that got reported to Salt Lake City. And my dad made sure that the prophet's office knew, and they transferred me out of there. And I went to Minnesota for a year. So,
wow. My daughter served in Chicago, Spanish
really?
speaking. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we had 9 different languages in our mission.
Yeah.
So, wow, I did not know that your daughter served there.
Yeah. 2004 or 5 or something like that. I can't remember.
Yeah, I loved being on my mission most of the time. I had a great time. It was great to be away from home, and met a lot of really good people, and I still have some really good friends from there. So,
Right.
yeah, so
Yeah, lots of fun experiences when we were a kid in the church, like road
loved
shows,
it. Yeah, road shows. We did like yeah, all the youth programs, the youth dances.
dances.
It was
Get
great.
your
I
little dance
literally
card
loved it.
to get your little dance
Yeah,
card
we
to
had to
prepare
sign
you
it.
for your temple recommend later.
Yeah, we had to prove our worthiness from a bishop's signature to go and present it to get into the dance. And we weren't allowed to wear pants, or, it was just, and then there were chaperones. I remember
You couldn't be
that
any
the
closer
band,
to your partner than the Book of Mormon.
yes, you had to be separate or they would separate you. No bear hugging. Yeah, and I just remember one time they stopped the band. They unplugged, one of the leaders unplugged the band's stuff because they were playing Huey Lewis in the News, I Want a New Drug.
Wow.
And they were
Devil
like,
worship.
"Oh my God, you can't play that." And we were like, it was just
That's right. It's
great.
just hilarious. And so
Yeah.
you get
So,
transferred to Minnesota. What parts of Minnesota
oh gosh, you're going to put
on
me
your
on the
mission?
spot. I just remember being out in one city, excuse me, called Candy Yohai. And there were like maybe 500 people and about 7 different types of churches. And our LDS church was 90 miles away. And
Wow.
to get someone to go to that, to travel that long was hard to do. And
That's worse
yeah,
than paying tithing almost.
yeah, we were out there as sisters on our own. It was crazy. I just can't believe that we went toward it. The safety issue, you look back now and just be like, what in the world were we thinking? But, as a missionary, you really feel like some entitlement and power, and that you're very well protected, and then you have all the rule books. They called it what, the little white Bible, the little rule books we had to follow and stuff. So I want to say too that I was so devoted to the church and was fully in, even though I saw a lot of things that weren't right. And, I questioned stuff throughout the years, um, that I found, when I had my child and I was divorced and a single mom, and it was just him and I. And I remember one night him getting really, really sick. And I believed in the power of prayer. And I just held him, and his fever broke and immediately, and he got better. And I remember my bishop, who was my home teacher, came over, and I was really emotional. And I shared with him that experience, and he's like, "Oh no, Kristy, we
Women can't do that.
do not dabble in the priesthood." And I'm all, what do you mean the priest did? And I go, I said a prayer over my son as a mother, you know, and he's like, yeah, you're kind of walking that fine line. And I was like, there's something wrong with you. So I
That's right.
was like, always in the
Your
back of my mind, like,
a
y'all are
woman's
crazy.
connection to God has to go through a man.
So I had comments like that all the time. And my final straw was when I had gotten fired from a job for something that I didn't do, but I'd reported. And I went to my bishop as a single parent asking for some assistance, because I'd always been devoted. And he goes, well, if you would have been married, when you should have in the temple, then you wouldn't have any problems like this and you wouldn't need the church. And if you would have just done that. And I was like, I'm done. Like that's the last straw for me. We're done. And so I kind of stepped back and just stepped back for a little while. And, you know, eventually that's a whole other show about how I left the church, but it was hard to do. But, I learned the history and stuff that affected me deeply and became very vulnerable. But it was the right thing to do. And, you know,
Right.
I think there's a lot more support now than there was back then. But with all that being said, I was still, very devoted
Attending and
to my
believing.
brothers and sisters. Huh?
You were attending and believing.
I wasn't attending church anymore,
Oh,
but I
okay.
was attending some churches and having my own spiritual journey, which is very important,
Right.
because it's gone all over the place. So, but I know we want to talk a little bit about the film and how that kind of all came about
Yeah, maybe we should
because
talk about your dad's problems first as a lead into it.
yeah. So bottom line is, my father um, is how do you? He's
Like a
an abuser.
serial molester,
He is a serial child predator,
predator.
and to this day, I do know of other victims that I've personally talked to that he's never come clean about. So it wasn't just my sisters. It wasn't just my siblings. It was outside the family until he comes clean with all that, which may never happen because he's been so coddled by the church and by a lot of people who think they're doing him a service by just loving him, and and
About
I'm
what
all
year is he?
for.
About yet what year was he first accused?
We first reported him when I was 6 years old. So we were living in Ogden. Um, my mom found him doing stuff with another sibling, an infant. Um, and there was also stuff with me going on that I told my mom. And, at so long story short, she took us over to the bishop's office and had a talk with him. And because my dad worked for the church education system, one of the things that they make you agree to, him and my mom both, was that you would never make the church look bad. You don't hear of institute teachers getting divorced or CES. And so everything had to be, everything was okay. So my mother was literally told by the bishop not to report this to the police and it would make the church look bad. And where would she go?
Right.
Because they weren't willing to help her.
Rule
Huh?
number one is to protect the church.
Always. And and the thing is, like, it's true like that with a lot of religions, always, as we've seen, in Jehovah Witness and Catholic Church. I'm just going to take a quick drink of water real quick.
Oh, sure. And so it's how did your story come out into the public eventually?
Yeah. So okay. I think it's important to let you know, and I know I've talked about this before, but this is so important as part of the backdrop for the story, is my mother got very ill and she was very young. She was still in her early 70s. But my mother got ill. And at this point in our lives, our dad had remarried. My mom divorced my father when everything came out. Oh gosh, it's kind of hard to like know where to start
Sure.
with this.
Sure. And it's about 10 years ago that you're.
No, what
Okay.
we turned my father in. Well, I went to the police with my siblings officially after my mission. So I was like 23, I believe.
Okay.
And we went directly over to the police and made reports against the church's wishes. Um, and so they were trying to pick up my father, the police were, but the church, along with my mother, if you can believe it, hid my father out because she was told by the leaders, he's not going to get picked up. You're not going to allow that. And so he didn't. And so there were four police, actually I found out there were four police reports about his abuse, felonies. And so he was never picked up for questioning.
Right. So that's the
And
mid 80s, right?
yeah, about 86, I believe it was. So anyway, he was turned in. The district attorney's office did not
Pursue it.
prosecute him. And a lot of things came out years later when we did lawsuits and stuff that we found out about. So basically, my mom divorced my dad, and then he remarried one of his students that he was teaching in an institute. But he had also been fired from the church as well. So they got married. They ended up moving to Lehi, Utah.
And is that like after 2000?
No, that was in the 1993,
Okay.
I
Wow.
believe it was. So they took off and moved to Lehi and made a life. And my dad got rebaptized, became like, he was rebaptized in California. And then he got back on the high council in Lehi. He was in like some leader again, and his wife was a primary teacher. Now, keep in mind, the church had put an annotation on his church record that he was not to be around children, that he was a danger to children, which I found it interesting that they made him his wife a primary teacher who would then bring the children over for primary parties at their home. I know that for a fact. And the leadership did not care when I called them to let them know that. They were like, yeah, okay.
Right. That
We
sounds very
repented,
similar
so what's the problem?
to the dentist that's in Idaho now, where the daughter has come out and said, my father is still around children and he shouldn't be, without people knowing. Right. And so, yeah, he has like a child dentistry office or something like that.
It's
And
just crazy
so,
that it can still go on to this day. I mean, nothing's changed if you really think
right.
about it. Like they're still letting people, but they have this really screwed up idea about repentance and that if you just love people, and I'm like, that's where, the whole thing about crime and sin, it's
Right.
like they want to view all this as just sin. And it's like,
Right.
okay, well, as a church, go ahead and deal with the sin, but you have to let law enforcement deal with the crime. That's why we have laws
And
and
how
prison.
did you come up with that title, No Crime and Sin?
Well, I
When
didn't
was
come
it?
up with it.
There you go.
The document people did. Jared Ruga, Amanda Stoddard, who directed the film. But there's a part in the film where my brother Kim is sitting across and he's asking my dad about his church court. Like, were you ever told by the church you need to go turn yourself in to be processed through the criminal justice system? And he said, no, they never mentioned that. And he said, oh, okay, so they made it just about sin and not about crime. And he's like, yeah. So there was a play on words, and the director and producer are like, no
That's
crime and
it.
sin. Yeah. So it was brilliant.
Eureka. We've got our title.
Ta-da. Yeah.
And
So
so let's see. So what were like the first events that led to the documentary? What do you think was
okay, so my mom was sick. My brother Kevin, who's now deceased, my brother Kim, and my sister Kathy and I were helped taking care of my mom. During that time period, my mom started opening up about 3 days before she passed away about everything that she knew. And she knew it would anger me, and it did. But she told me things that I kind of knew growing up, but I didn't have certain details like the bishop's name or, but it matched up with where we were living at the time. So
and about what
anyway,
year was this? When did your mom
my
pass?
mom passed in 2015, August.
Okay.
Yeah. So during that time, when my brother Kevin he plays a very important part of all the preparation for the documentary, is he was very angry at my father because he's off living this great life with his wife and, you know, unscathed and loved and supported. And my mom's dying in a little studio apartment where she's barely making it.
And she's
And
like the righteous one between the
well,
two.
she never remarried, it was a really bad marriage and he was horrible to her. Not saying that she's unscathed, but, because she would probably be arrested to this day for knowing and allowing, but she was
Right.
also quite a bit of a victim of his as well.
Just like the
So,
Arizona case.
yes. Yeah. Ooh, that, that case is hard too.
I'm going to
Um,
put links to some of these things we talk about in the show description so
yeah,
people can
it's just
go
what the
and do some
pressure
of
they
their own
put on.
research.
Yeah. And I think that's important because it's interesting if you connect all the dots, like you were talking earlier about connecting all these dots and seeing how this is a repeated pattern that they do. So my mom was dying. So Kevin was very upset with my father during that time. And Kevin was this great, great brother, great father, husband, very dedicated to the church still, very loving, supportive. But he was angry at my father and he said, "Why is it that our mother is dying in squalor and he's still living this great life?" And he was very angry. And he said, "We need to have a sit down with dad. Like, he needs to answer for all this. We need some answers." And so my brother Kim and Kathy and I believe we all wrote a letter to my dad and requested a meeting with him. And he actually, surprisingly, my mom died, and it was all during that time we were writing a letter to him. And then when she passed away, he had a really hard time with it. He called me personally sobbing. "I'm so sorry. I really need to talk to you guys." And I'm like, "Well, we'll have that moment, but for now we're grieving our mother and
Right.
what happened to
No,
her."
it's not about you.
Yeah. So we're not going to make it about you right now to clear whatever conscience you had of being a horrible husband to her. So anyway, so that's the beginning of all that. And then we were getting ready to go visit my dad. And then I was online one day, social media, and I saw one of my friends when we lived in Provo. My dad was in the bishopric with this guy. And I was good friends in grade school with her. And her name is Michelle Snow. And I saw that she was writing a post about a book she was writing and her experiences, how her father had hurt her growing up in the same manner that my father was hurting me at the exact same time. And I reached out to her like, "Oh my God," and then she said, "Kristy, you need to call." Um, what is the name of the group? I
So it's
tell
like
you, sometimes
you trauma bonded.
for humanity, yeah, something for humanity. Oh my goodness, I feel so embarrassed.
We'll
Yeah,
come up with it later and I'll put it in the
okay, thank you
description.
so much. Yeah, and so she said, "You need to call them. They're great. They'll talk to you, just,
And
And
are they a
so,
production company or a
no, they are
healthcare?
just people that it's a group that really helps and supports a lot of people.
Okay,
Um,
support group.
yeah. And but they're much bigger than that. And so I called the hotline and there was a disconnect and I thought, I don't want to call this place. And then I did call them and I was able to speak to them and they were very kind and they said, what happened with your story? Like, tell me a little bit. And I was telling them who my dad was and, just how there was this cover up and our police records disappeared and like our names were removed from everything. And my dad never was arrested. And, and then how the church played a part in all that. And they said, "We have somebody who's looking to make a film,
Hmm.
who's a documentarian. Um, And would you mind if I connected you to you guys? And can we get permission to talk to maybe your brother or, sister or whatever?" And so I was like, "Sure." And I talked to my family and they were like, "Yeah, of course, we'll talk to whoever." And so somewhere in between the timing of all that, my brother Kevin goes into the emergency room because he's having pain in his hip. And this is the guy who wanted this big meeting. And, the anniversary of his death is coming up on Monday. He was only like 53, best shape of his life. But he went in, and 4 days later, he unexpectedly
Wow.
died.
Was it
And
like an
we,
aneurysm or,
no, there
do you
was some
know,
kind of infection that settled into
infection?
his hip, and then it spread to his organs while they were doing that. And he had to have open heart surgery. And before they could begin, he coded. And it was in the middle of the night, and it was very, very traumatic. Um, and that I literally pretty much collapsed into the arms of my siblings when I got to the hospital because I missed him by 5 minutes. Um, and but I got to, sit with him, his body, and my brother and sister, and um, we had to start making phone calls, to family members and his children. One of his sons was still on a mission; he had a week left, and so it was very traumatic. There's a lot of uh, details that a lot of people don't know about that, but the fact that he died when we were right on the verge of doing something that meant so much to him. So we decided we were just going to go with it, and
Right.
keep that appointment with my father.
It could have been a point where you just sort of gave up and like said, oh, well, I guess it's not meant to be. Or it could be something that gives you even more resolve to get it done.
Yeah. And what was interesting is that this was 5 months after we buried my mother. So my brother just, that was such a shock to us. And so my brother Kim and Kathy and sister Kathy, we were talking to the film people, and we said, look, we're going to go meet with our dad. We've already got it set up. And they said, oh my gosh, do you think we could film it? And we're like, well, we're okay with it, but you'd have to ask, they go, do you think your dad would agree to it? And I'm thinking, hell no. You know, why would somebody want to do that? Now, keep in mind too, when we asked to talk to my dad, we told him we need answers about this, this, and this. We're going to be blunt. It's going to be real, no lying. You know,
He knew the
if
agenda.
you're
You weren't going to surprise him.
No, and we weren't going to have like a secret recording. We weren't going in like that for our story. I'm all for whatever other people have to do, and I think it's great, whatever you have to do. For us, though, where we were at, um, anyway, so Jared and Amanda were awesome, and the the film people, and so they said, "Well, could you ask him?" So my brother Kim asked my dad, you know, "We have a film crew. We're making it, we would like to film our meeting." And my dad said, "Let's do it." And we were shocked. The film people were like, all right. So it was like, everybody's mic'd, let's get the cameras rolling, you know. And so we had gone into Utah the night before and stayed with the Ruga family, who I love. And we interviewed for a little bit on film there, talking a little bit about our story. And then they got us in the car driving over to my dad's. And, that's how you see us driving through. That's how the film kind of starts out. And yeah, so there was no like, we didn't ambush my dad. There wasn't some like, oh, this poor old man, they're taking advantage of him. He's all alone. And, I've heard all these comments from different people who've seen the film, like, how could you do that to this poor older man? And I'm thinking, wow, you need to keep in mind we were children that were being sexually assaulted. So keep that in mind as well as you're feeling sorry for this guy. And so anyway, that's kind of how it all kind of started, with full permission, went in, if he wanted support there, he could have had anybody there to help support him. I think he probably thought we were making a church film. I don't know, on repentance. That's just because his ego, that's the one thing he's always been consistent with, is his ego. And if you watch the film, there's a few things that I've not really spoken too much about that. I think it's important because there was a lot of raw footage that didn't make, the
Yeah, I was
final
going to
cut.
say it's really a little bit shorter than most documentaries in time. And
Yeah.
and I was going to ask you if you had lots more.
Yeah, there were several hours, and then they filmed in California. They filmed us. It started out the original idea was to have it be like a docu-series. And
Oh,
so there was a lot of filming going on. But at the exact same time, our filmmakers were finishing up a film called Quiet Heroes. And that made it to Sundance during all of this while they're filming us. And then they also won a daytime Emmy for it. So, they had a lot going on with another film, but the one who stayed so devoted and would not let it sit on his shelf was Jared Ruga, who I will eternally be grateful to him. He's a good friend to this day, but he's the one who kept it going and pushed for it to be finished. And whatever decision was made to, make it into a short film, you know, uh, it is what it is, and maybe at some point they'll do a follow up on it, you know,
right. The rest
which
of the
would be
story.
great. Huh?
The rest of the story.
Yeah, because a lot's happened since then. But the thing that's important about the film is it did catch, and you talk about the universe and things connecting. I mean, when my brother Kim asked my father, about it being safe for the children in the neighborhood and in his ward, if you notice right literally during that question is when children are walking through my dad's back door without knocking. Okay. And just being like, hi, Brother Johnson, and we're just like, what the hell? What? And
It's
so,
a surreal moment.
yeah. And for that to be caught on camera, you start realizing like, this is bigger than us. Okay. The way things fell into place, what people didn't realize either during the raw footage and stuff is, they took a break and they were changing the film. And I think it's when we were waiting for the police to arrive as well. And they had to switch out the film really quick. This little girl pops up from underneath the kitchen table. And he's got like this living room and then the kitchen table. We had no idea she was there. And she was probably like 3. And we're like, who are who are you? And she's like, she gave us her name. And my sister Kathy was very angry and she said, you need to go home. And she ran over to my father and she was like holding on to him and hugging him and sitting on his lap. And my sister goes, get out of, you need to leave. And she was like, well, who said? Who said I asked? And we're like, smart ass. Sorry about that. But she was just like,
Sure.
we would just this child. Like we couldn't believe that this little girl was there. And she just felt very comfortable and was running around the house and knew where to go upstairs. And, it was disturbing. And so Kathy finally got her to leave and to go home. So that was a shocking part of it, um, that happened. And then, when the police did come, and all of it's filmed, it's in the raw footage, but we made our reports and we didn't realize it that after Kim had called, when the neighbor lady came over and she said, I need to go make a phone call. Now, you notice in the film, she's not shocked. Like he's telling her, like, I did this to my kids. I was never criminally, you know, held responsible for it. Like he knows, he knows. And she's just like, oh, well, who's here for you? Like, no shock. Like her voice, I mean, her facial expression, because we couldn't show it legally, but she wasn't shocked at all. And I'm thinking, what's going on here? This is weird. Were those, are those your kids? Like, what's happening? Um, but she went and made a phone call, but the cops had arrived. What we didn't know, my brother knew, but they lined up when the cops got there because they're like, is there a problem?
They want to
Because my
defend him.
brother's telling him he wants to confess to you. And they're like, is there a safety concern? Like, are you guys going to hurt him? Like, what are we looking at when we get there? But they were in a line. There was a bunch of cops and they came up through and came in. And, they took my dad's statement. They never wrote anything down. He was sitting there confessing, you know, they didn't they didn't do anything, and then I get pulled out on the porch and they said, we can't arrest him. And
It's
I'm
all
like, okay.
circumstantial and hearsay.
Well, no, my dad confessed. He was confessing
Oh,
to the
that's right.
cops. Here's what I did. Here's what I did to my daughters. Here's when it started. You know, and they were just like, oh, okay, and you look back now and I believe, and I will double check this, but I believe once that report was made in the state of Utah, because he committed crimes there should have been some kind of a clock that started, either, a time frame of when they should have either made an arrest, even if it was years later, because it's first being reported. So I just found it interesting that they did not do anything to him. And they pulled me out on the porch and the guy was telling me like I used to be part of the SUV, crime or whatever, not SUV,
Yeah, I know
SVU.
what you're saying.
Do you see how old I am?
Uh-huh.
Anyway, yeah, so he was part of that and I was like, well, oh good, so you're going to take him, right? Like, and he's like, who are all these, do you know all these kids in the neighborhood? And I'm like, I'm from California. I don't know who these kids are, you know? And he's like, well, I will promise you. He goes, we can't arrest him. But what I can promise you is I'm going to go door to door with my
Interview.
officers and we're going to warn them, the parents. We're going to talk to them and see if they know of anything and be aware that there's a problem over here.
That's right. Because even though there's plenty of evidence and plenty of time for him to have been convicted of a crime, where he would be on that, what's that website where you can see the child molesters in your neighborhood?
The sex offender list,
The
the
sex
registered
offender
sex
list.
offender list. Yeah.
Yeah. There was none of that available to anybody. This is all just surprising news to his neighbors.
Well, part of the raw footage, and people don't know this, is my brother Kim asked him why we're waiting for the cops. Because my dad became pretty cocky during that time, which people didn't see because obviously it wasn't put in the film. But my brother Kim goes, would you like to be put on the, if you're sorry, because you claimed you're sorry, because he at one time was crying, I'm so sorry, please forgive me. And, my brother Kim's like, they're not doing well. Like, my sisters aren't well. They've had a really hard life. And I think you owe them something, to help them with their lives. And he goes, I'll give anything. I would give up my home. Like, I'll give you my bank accounts, my investments. What can I do to help you? And so my brother Kim's like, okay, that's good. You want to do something for them, you know. And so that's where that promise of helping us, came about later on in the film. But um, he was very, very sorry. But then when Kim's like, would you be willing to register yourself on the sex offender list? We'll see if that's available. And
Oh,
my dad goes, whatever they're requiring of me, I'll do. And but then, you know, he changed a little bit. Then the cops got there and he really thought, later I realized he really thought he was going to be arrested. And I think we did for a little bit. We thought he would be arrested. And then when they pulled me out on the porch, like I was saying, they said, we can't do that. But we promised that we'll make sure that the neighbor kids, that people know so that we can help until we get this all figured out.
do you have a
But
thought behind why they said that they couldn't arrest him?
I think they were following instructions.
Do you think that there were Latter-day Saint leaders above them that sort
Oh,
of
yeah.
made your dad untouchable?
Yes, my dad to this day remains untouchable. He was untouchable in Utah. He was untouchable in California. So much so that they've, whoever powers that be, when they checked years later, when our lawsuits were coming out, we were doing all of that, there had to be like, records subpoenaed and all that. And shortly after we reported, it was within a few years that we found out that there were no records in the
Wow.
Westminster Police Department. All those records, our names were nowhere. My dad's name was nowhere, nowhere in the courts, nothing. Social services, they had done 2 investigations. Our names were removed from that. So even Sacramento, they keep all the records for California, and they go clear back decades and
Wow.
decades.
It's almost like your dad not only had a LDS second anointing, but a U.S. government second anointing.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't realize, my dad was in Army intelligence, when he
Mm.
first met my mom. So he had his training back, when we
So
were
it's a
just
national
little.
security
I don't
issue
know.
regarding him
You
or
wonder.
something.
It's weird because I've never wanted it to be like this dun dun dun, but it really is. It's weird. I don't
Wow.
know who's behind all of it. I can guess. But
Let's
it's
mark a note right now, and we'll say people that are watching this living 30 years in the future, if you can, try to uncover what records exist that would exonerate or exempt your dad from having justice.
yeah. How can a district attorney
We'll never
not
see
come
the
after
result of
him?
that, but maybe
Yeah.
in the future,
They'll find somebody's got records somewhere. I'm telling
something
you.
is somewhere.
But it is odd, and I think that's another thing that made this so, that's why the story will always continue on because, other siblings, I have a sister who's involved in a lawsuit against the church right now. Um, because I had 2 sisters. One did not want to be involved in the film or have her name, put in the film at all. So she's out at, her case is out of Los Angeles. And so that's presently going on. So I probably shouldn't talk a lot about it. Um, but, my sister in the film, I want to talk about Kathy, my little sister, because she, her big thing was, I'm not going to say anything. And the thing, I want to point something out too that I haven't talked about. In the film, there's a part where Kathy is by herself and they're interviewing her in her little red jacket. And she goes, I don't even care if he doesn't know my name. So what if he doesn't say my name? He doesn't know my name. I don't care. He's not important. The reason she said that is because when we were growing up, my dad refused to call Kathy by her name. He would
Huh.
call her or get over
Like
here
speaking the
or like,
third person almost.
yeah. And she never understood why he wouldn't
That
call her
girl.
Kathy. Yeah, and so I was 9 years, 9 years older than her, and so that was my favorite name in the whole world was Kathy, and they named her Kathy for me, and so that's how we became very close through the years. But my dad, I noticed as she was a kid and going into teenage years, because she was just barely a teenager when everything came out, but he would not address her by her name and so she kind of hinted to that in the film, but people don't know that because they don't have that background. But when she was able to sit across from him and opened her mouth and started to cry and say, I never understood why you never loved me, you know, that we didn't realize the significance of that because here she was, never being able to talk back to him, never being able to meet across from him and confront him about the tremendous pain. She had a very hard life. And being able to speak up and address that with him and not letting him get away with, oh, and she called him and made him, shut up and listen. And that was a brilliant moment. And I'll be grateful forever too for the film for catching that on film. Because as you know, after the film, it was a few months later that Kathy she started getting sick and she was diagnosed with brain cancer. So they were still in the middle of filming when Kathy was in the hospital. And they told Kathy that she only had about 6 weeks to live. And I remember calling the filmmakers and I said, look, you know, Kathy was diagnosed, but now nothing's working, her chemo. and everything. And Kathy had never even seen any part of the film, you know. And so the filmmakers with a cameraman drove all night long to get to California to be able to see Kathy, you know. And we met with her briefly, and that's a whole other book and story about what happened with her because it wasn't good. But we talked to her, and they wanted to show her bits and pieces, you know, of what they put together. But she got very ill, even overnight, and so that we weren't able to show her even part of that. So she passed away, you know, before the film. So she was never able to see it. I think she never got to see No Crime and Sin and to see the legacy that she left, you know, and how brave she was, and the fact that, you know, this film caught that, you know, her facing her monster or her perpetrator who helped bring or who caused such harm in her life. And to be able to face that and to catch that on film there was a lot of moments like that in that short film. So yeah, that's why they show at the end, you know, that she did pass away, but to have those moments were beautiful forever on film, you know.
Right.
But
And
it's interesting
it's a
because I don't
tribute
think a
to
lot of people.
it's a tribute to, you know, it's like the human connection that their attempts to try to get her to be able to see some of the footage is it shows how good people can be, right? They were being
Yeah,
good,
and their
even though it didn't
intention
work out.
was, yeah, and you have to realize too with filmmakers, what's their intention? You know, because if you want people to tell your story, you want there to be a certain amount of respect and not sensationalism. And they were never about sensationalism, but it's interesting that they caught some very incredible moments, keeping a very humble, you know, and respectful way of filming. And so I appreciated that. Um, I was going to tell you something about the ending. A lot of people too, I get a lot of feedback from people even to this day, and they ask a lot of questions. One is about why did you guys hug your dad? And one of the chapters I'm writing about my book, because I've written a memoir, but you know, we're revamping that. But I'm also started another book about some really deep things. And it's entitled, you know, one of the chapters, The Hug, you know, because people don't realize the power that was behind that. Um, because we did want to, you know, we had just honored our mother that way, you know, in forgiving her for a lot of the stuff and ended our time with her on a higher level of love. And we knew, you know, that my father, we had carried all this for years and he went on with his life. He didn't really care. You know, he's got so much support that I think he thinks he really got away with it. He still is getting away with it, you know, but at some point he'll have to face it. He will.
Right. But the hug is like shows the high road that you guys were
Showed the
taking.
high road, but I was also taking my power back that day because people don't realize that I literally said goodbye to him. I'm like, I'm not carrying this anymore. You don't even have a picture or anything that I existed in your life. You know, you went on, and I've been carrying this for decades. You affected me deeply, and you don't even care, you know, and you haven't even repented because you haven't come clean about everything. So
The hug is
that was
almost like a
me.
close but no cigar, Dad.
Yeah, you got, and you know, there was a part in the film, it's interesting. He came real close, I think, to telling more stuff, but he caught himself. And you see him switch between crying, and then you see all of a sudden his facial stuff changes, and you see the real guy, and that's towards the end where he's sitting alone on the couch, and all of a sudden he goes like this, and he's not shaking anymore. He's not weepy, you know, and I think he thought that the filming had stopped, but they kept it rolling, you know. And then the fact look what he did afterwards. We're all waiting to hear from him.
Oh, so that almost shows like he was acting when he was.
Yeah. And then we found out right after we left, it would be months later, when we hired an attorney and did all that, because he never came to us and said, hey, we wrote letters and said, hey, you know, what can you still help us and can we talk? And my dad just was like, oh, I'm in a really bad spot. I don't have anything. And we're like, you have a lot. What are you talking about? So we found out that he had written or handed over basically his
His
home,
assets.
his accounts, everything to the neighbor lady. So that was all part of the shock of realizing, wow, what an unrepentant jerk. He really wasn't sorry. And
That's right. Everyone
it was
listening
shocking.
can probably think of other words to call him, but we'll just leave it
Yeah.
at
It'd be
unrepentant jerk.
bleeping out if I said what I really wanted.
That's
Yeah,
right.
but he just ended up, I was thinking, wow, what a jerk, and the fact that, we let him know, you know, about Kathy passing away and, about, you know, he just he's so far removed. The sick part about people who allow this and don't serve time in prison, because I do believe they should all serve time, whatever amount, but there should be a mandatory prison sentence. Because if they don't, right? If you just got a bishop being like, shh, God's telling me we just need to work on this, we don't need to get the police involved. That's a crime, right? Because why are you getting involved in that? Why don't you just let them truly repent? Because if you don't allow someone to face what they've done, they never feel the brunt of it. They don't take it seriously, and they do continue abusing. They do. And they're sick and they need to be removed from society. And so, with him never getting in trouble, never being picked up, never being questioned, he probably thinks he's part of that pioneer stock that's protected, right? Because I'm sure all of CES, I could almost bet money on it that they've all got the second anointing. And, I'm pretty sure. Because my dad's ego, one time when my parents were arguing, this is when I knew something was really bad, besides everything else, is I was a teenager and my mom and dad were arguing, and she goes, you're not God. And he goes, oh no, you pray through me to get to God.
I am your God.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, that's jacked. Like, what? We gotta marry in the temple and pray through our husband. It was so confusing. But my dad's ego to this day feeds, and people feed into that. The people that support him and love him and don't let him go without a meal and check on him, and, like he's this pitiful soul. They never even gave him a chance. They are doing him a disservice. He needs to face what he did.
And that's the power of a confidence man, a con man, is to make everybody feel everything's okay, and I'm doing everything as nice as humanly possible, and then that's when they get you when your guard's down. That's the way
Yeah.
they work.
Well, let's have primary kids over for parties. Let's have him go, because they just love him. And just, I'm thinking to myself, how,
Because you
no,
never know when you're conned until something is taken from you, either your money or your virtue or something, you know.
yeah. Well, and it really shouldn't be that way. You think that people would be disgusted and be like, why is he not in prison? Why are my children over there? Any of that. But it happened for us just the opposite. And I'm sure a lot of people face that, but you cannot control the criminal justice system. You cannot. There
Right.
is a lot of not good things with that.
And so the documentary wraps up. Did you remember what you're going to say about the end of the documentary?
I think it was
Um,
just mostly about us hugging our father and how
the hug.
important it is to realize, but we did end on a higher level of love.
Hmm.
The only other time I saw my father, was during depositions. I didn't see him in person, of course. He didn't
Hmm.
see me. He knew I was, that I could see him. But he was cocky even then. He's wearing a
Right.
little bow tie and suspenders. He had like a surgery to stop his shaking. His hair was longer. He laughed during part of the questioning, like, oh, but one thing that they did ask him is, is Kristy a good person? And he said, she is. And they said, does she lie? Has she ever lied? Is she dishonest? And he said, absolutely not. She's a very honest, good person. And they said, so, basically, we should believe her. And he goes, yes.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, okay.
Wow. So the filming wraps up. How long does it take before it gets shown?
Well, it started out as, glass temples, because that was even shorter. Because that's how it started out. And we had a big showing of that. That's when we did our lawsuit where I sued my father in federal court in Utah. And so we held a news conference. Craig Vernon was our attorney.
And what
And
year was that? So people
that
want to
was
research.
June 28th, which was on my older brother Kevin's birthday, which I thought was really interesting how that landed. That was in 2018. And that was our story, our news conference, which ended up being like an hour long. But Fox was there, got picked up by the AP. That's when the story went viral. And the fact that I was able to sue my father under that law that was in place in Utah at the time, which took away the statute of limitations. It didn't allow you to sue the church, of course. But it allowed me to sue my perpetrator, my father. So I did that. So that made news along with Glass Temples. We had a showing of that. And then after that, then Kathy got sick, and then, she passed. And then I got called to Utah by the film people, and they said, we need to do more. We need to put more to this. We need to continue the story because of everything that's happened. And so that's when they had me move to Utah for a while, and they put together more of the film and added more things, and then it became No Crime and Sin. And then we had a huge premiere in 2019, which was gigantic, and then it was got on to Amazon Prime after that.
Do you know
So
when it first appeared on Amazon Prime? You recall that?
oh gosh, what's funny is Jared and I waited up all night because we knew the night it was starting. I want to say it was sometime in 2019, I believe it was, just sometime there, because him and I did like a funny thing. We were so tired, but he was like, oh, look at it. And he showed you how to like log into Amazon Prime and to choose No Crime and Sin. And so that was a really big deal. But I think it was 2019. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact
Sure.
date, but there is a video announcing it. But that took off. And I do know that there's been thousands and thousands of views of that film. And to this day, it's going strong. I think because of the different stories that come out, because there's whose stories are way more horrendous. Ooh, if I can say that, than ours even, and I think
Right.
if your story can be told, it should be.
And I think I first saw it at the end of COVID summer when I started to learn more and more things about the church and about other news things. I was more attentive. And what struck me about your documentary, I think, was, the fact that even though he would sort of seem repentant, it just never quite happened, right? He makes promises and doesn't deliver.
Right. And the whole time he's sneaking behind the scenes, with people making phone calls. The police all of a sudden aren't doing anything. No one's, it's very interesting to see how it all kind of landed. But to this day, he's not come clean with everything.
It's almost like a documentary on what really shouldn't happen when crimes are committed.
Yeah. And
And
people
so,
ask me, was it worth it? And it absolutely is worth it. You know,
right.
you take a chance when people start realizing your story. I mean, it's affected me personally because, even in relationships, I had to make the decision of going forward, knowing that people know that I've always been, that I was a victim as a child and throughout, and you make life decisions based on that. But I have no regrets. And I know my sister Kathy didn't. My brother Kevin, what a brave guy who started all that and then died suddenly, and then my brother Kim to be able to sit across from him, you know. So there's way more to the story, and there's so much more that's happened since then, you
Right.
know, um, with
And
our
and
personal lives.
when are you hoping your book comes out?
I don't know. I will. I hope soon because the memoir was finished. And we were making some tweaks to that. We had a bunch of people
Mhm.
reading it, I think they call it a beta group. I don't know, something like that.
Right. Oh,
Um,
sort of like test audience
yeah.
to see
And
what it's
it's
like,
just,
what
you
the
want to
reaction.
make sure that first time that you release, and print something that it's perfect, but there's a lot of other stories to be told in our family. My sister's story of her life, how she was a domestic violence survivor and what happened in her death, and then what happened with my brother Kevin when he passed and the whole, how the church got involved with that. And yeah, so it's
Right.
all,
Well,
we all have a story in it, and I want to tell their stories.
it's been so great having you on, and let me know as your book's coming out, and we'll have you back to talk about
Yeah.
the book making process
Well,
as
thank you.
well.
Yeah.
And everyone, if you've been sort of attentive and enthralled with all the behind the scenes information and you like the content that we're producing, please like and subscribe. Check out No Crime and Sin when you can, if you haven't already. And, be attentive. Let's make the world a better place by, correcting things that need to be corrected. And so,
Yeah. Amen to that. And you can also see the film, like if you go to the website, www.nocrimeandsin.com, there's also up at the top press. And if you click on that, you're going to see a lot of our news stories that were picked up, Huffington Post, like everybody picked it up. But that's got information. But there's also links on there that'll link you to Amazon Prime. And then I think you can also see it on Vimeo or whatever that's called.
right, other streamers, right?
Yeah. So that's another way that people can see it as well.
Yeah. And so I've heard it before. Maybe the first time I heard it was from John DeLynn, but sunshine is the best disinfectant. And we need to talk about things that are not right in order to get them corrected. And
Yeah.
so there's an organization called floodlit.org
Oh,
that is
I
doing
love
a
them.
great work trying to get the word out that in order to recognize there's a problem, you have to be aware of it. And so everyone check out that. I'll link that in the show notes.
Huge, huge fan of them.
It's been great. I can't wait to visit with you again. And just everybody, if you can, if you know Kristy, send your love to her and support all the projects that are going on. Read the papers about all the things that are in the news about problems within either the church or other religious organizations. We all need to band together to help. We're not going to stop problems, but we can hopefully limit them in the future. And so thanks everybody for watching.
Yeah. Thank
Signing
you so
out
much for
from
having me.
Latter Daily Digest, and we'll talk to everyone later. Bye bye.